Hello, my name is Carson Davis, and for my Bible lesson, as I'm a woman and it won't be a sermon, my Bible lesson will be over the Proverbs 31 woman. It's just something that was very easy to talk about because I have had Bible lessons that center around this a lot where I worked as a camp counselor at a Christian camp, and I had a lot of middle school, grade school, middle school, high school girls, and this is just always a good lesson to talk about, especially as a woman. So, in this Bible lesson, we talk about the attributes of a godly woman, the characteristics, really. What does it mean to be a woman who is seeking after God and God's heart, and just the characteristics of a godly woman. In this speech, I start at Proverbs 31, verse 10, and I go all the way to verse 31. And the first part is a woman who is seeking after God's own heart. She is virtuous, and you can find that in verse 10, where an excellent woman who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. So she is hard to find. She's rare and she's precious, which I'm using the ESV version, but in other versions it says she is virtuous. She is faithful and loyal. You find that in verses 11 and 12. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. So what that means is she is faithful and loyal to her husband. He has complete and total trust in her, and he lacks no gain with her. If anything, all he does is gain from her. She does him good and not harm all the days of his life. And whenever I think of that, I not only think she's loyal and faithful and helps him in every aspect of his life, but also she doesn't talk negatively about him. And that is very important when it comes to being a woman of God, is that you never talk negatively about your husband to anybody, not even your parents or girlfriends. And I personally struggle with that, and I'm finding that that's something I need to work on personally with my fiance. But as you work closer and closer and seek after God, you will find it easier and easier to only talk positively about your husband to other people. A godly woman is hardworking, and that's not just in the verses 13 through 19. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of a merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maid. For her maid. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands on the distaff and holds her hand to the spindle. So what that means is, it doesn't just mean obviously this woman that they're painting a picture of actually goes out in the fields and works with her hands all day and for most of the night. She gets up while it's still dark, and that's going to be a struggle for me as a wife, but she get up extra early and make breakfast and all that, because I am not a morning person whatsoever. But just the fact that this woman is so hardworking, and all she seeks after is to serve her family. And that's just what it means by hardworking, is just to constantly be serving your family, to not fall into idleness, and to just work hard, because your job, first and foremost, is to be a wife and then to be a mother. She's giving. In verse 20, she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. So she's very giving to those in need. I think of my mother, who, instead of selling clothes that we have, she always just gives them out. And that's just an attribute that I've noticed about my mother, how giving she is. A godly woman takes care of her family. You find that in verse 21 and 22. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. her clothing is fine linen and purple. So she takes care of her family. She makes sure they are always provided. She's not afraid of the snow because she knows that she's already prepared for it and her family is going to be taken care of and won't freeze. She respects her husband and lifts him up. In verse 23, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So what that means, again, going back to never talking negatively about your husband, and she shows nothing but respect to him, and to others she lifts him up so that he is known as this great man, great godly man to everybody else. She is strong and wise and does not worry about the future. And you can find that in verses 25 through 27. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. So what that means is strength and dignity are her clothing. I mean, that does not literally mean that, strength and dignity are your only clothing. That means that she is covered with strength and dignity, and she shows no fear or weakness because she knows where she stands. She's following after God. She laughs at the time to come because she has no fear of the future because she rests in God's sovereignty. Her mouth opens with wisdom and kindness, and that with that comes with, if you are constantly seeking after God, God will give you wisdom, and if you're constantly praying for the fruits of the Spirit and have the Holy Spirit in you, He will give you kindness. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Again, that goes back to hardworking and just not falling to the temptation of just being an idle wife or an idle mother. Because it's from what I've seen, it's so easy to fall into the laziness, or not the idleness of just being tired all the time and not doing what God has called you to do. And that can be said for anybody, not just wives and mothers. Her children are thankful for her. That's found in verses 28 through 29. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. So her children are so thankful for her. Now, I can imagine, this is hard. When I was a child, my mother, looking back, is a very, very godly woman, and she always has been. But there were times in my childhood that I did not really was very thankful for that because I was a child and I was immature. And so that doesn't mean that your children are always going to rise up and call you blessed, but that does mean that at some point, possibly in the future, that they will look back on their childhood like I have now and say, oh my goodness, my mother was this great godly woman. And her husband also praises her consistently and says, you have surpassed them all. And he just sees that because all she does is give him respect and love. She's inwardly beautiful because of her fear of the Lord and her fruitfulness. And that's lastly found in 30 through 31. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruits of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. So that goes to, it doesn't matter how beautiful a woman is, beauty doesn't last, but it's the fear of the Lord that she has and the fruits that she shows that shows her true beauty. And that is what gets her praise from her children and her husband. So in conclusion, there are many attributes to being a godly woman, but these are the ones that God specifies in Proverbs and paints a picture of how we as women should strive to be. Thank you.